Hey guys, Danny Johnson here, and today we're going to talk about how the V6 Mustang can actually be attributed to being the true Terminator of the Camaro and Firebird. And this, of course, is going to be on a production level, not so much a performance level. So just a little backstory, my twin brother and I had V6 Mustangs growing up. Now, to date us, this was 2001, and these were 97 Mustangs. They were a few years old, and despite their 150 horsepower, we loved these cars to death, and that's when we really started getting involved with Mustangs and learning all about them. And that's when we found out that the Mustang was outselling the Camaro and the Firebird combined 2-1. Okay, so we had a lot of pride in that statement, and we were really happy with that. So on a production level, that's what the Mustang was doing and making it very hard for GM. Now, GM, on the other hand, performance-wise, I'm going to say had the upper hand on the Mustang, and we're going to be looking more kind of the fourth generation here is what we're talking about, because that's when the Camaro ultimately ended. Now, in 1993, the Camaro came out of the gate swinging. It was 1 year before the Mustang would come out with its fourth generation, and it had the LT1 5.7-liter, which was 275 horsepower and 325 pound-feet of torque. That's a magnificent engine, a lot of power. Some people make fun of that engine to this day. They don't like the design and some things about it, but really, it was a good engine and very powerful. And so when everybody looked over at the Mustang when it debuted in 1994, I think some were pretty disappointed to see it just had a carryover 5.0 basically, and so the Mustang GT was only making 215 horsepower, and 285 pound-feet of torque was okay, but it was definitely behind the 8-ball. And then the Cobra for 94 was another pushrod 5.0, and it was only 240 horsepower, so still just below the Z28. So you had to have the highest Mustang in order to even compete really with the LT1. Ford then switched over to the modular platform, and so the 1996 4.6-liter 2-valve engine, but it was still only 215 horsepower. It's basically very similar numbers than the 5.0. So in 1996, Ford unveiled the dual overhead cam Cobra engine. This was the 4-valve per cylinder, and so it was a little bit better. It was 305 horsepower, and so they were starting to compete with the Camaro, which was now an LS1, so it was even more horsepower than the LT1. And Motor Week kind of put them head to head and took them down to the drag strip. And so it was. I think this was even more Ford bias, just to tell you the truth, even being a Ford fan, because when you watch this video and you see him just completely smoke the tires on the Camaro on the way up, it's like it just wasn't really doing that great. And so in the end, they ran a quarter mile of 13.7 at 104 for the Mustang, and then 13.8 at 106 for the LS1. So it really wasn't that much different. You could definitely see the Camaro was the faster car, a higher trap speed. It was a traction limited thing, and their real argument was that the Camaro was a little bit heavier. And so then in 1999, Ford unveiled the Performance Improved, or the PI, 4.6-liter 2-valve, which is now 260 horsepower. And the dual overhead cam engine, the Cobra, was similar, but now supposed to be 320. There were some issues with that, as you'll see in another video I can put in the description for the 99 Cobra, which was resolved in 2001. But ultimately, they were still pretty similar, and the Camaro Firebird still had the slight upper hand. Now here's a chart, and I'll put the link in the description to it, but it's showing the sales of the Mustang versus the Camaro, so keep in mind Firebird was still part of this too. But Mustang versus Camaro, look at these sales numbers. The red being the Mustang and the blue being the Camaro. You can just see how badly it was getting destroyed. And keep in mind, you throw in some Firebird numbers, it was still 2-1. And so now, as the two of them are battling it out performance-wise, let's get into the real problem that the Camaro and the Firebird faced against the Mustang, and that was the sales. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the Mustang was outselling the Firebird and Camaro combined 2-1. So that made it really difficult for them to keep up with. And I believe that was the main reason for GM stopping the production of the Firebird and the Camaro, because when you go to develop a new body style, you have to invest billions of dollars. Okay, so it's a lot of money. So at this point, they were seeing that they were getting killed, and they were understanding, like, we have to do one of two things. We either have to come out and invest a huge amount into a new platform and do something better, or at this point, we just cut our losses and we're done. So ultimately, that's why the production of the Firebird and Camaro had come to an end. Now, keep in mind, the V6 Mustang is the one doing the majority of this destruction, okay? It's cool to have Cobras and GTs and everything like that, but they don't account for quite as many sales as the V6. And so the V6 is the bread and butter. That's what is selling and making it basically impossible for GM to compete. And so also, because of the V6 Mustang and its sales, there was the budget to produce the Cobra and the other cars, even the Mach 1. So you have to be very grateful for the V6 Mustang in making it able for Ford to produce the cars that we love, what we'll say is the most. Now, long before the Camaro and Firebird's production end was announced, John Coletti, the chief engineer at SVT, was working very hard on the Terminator Cobra. Okay, this was about 2001 or so, and they were working on the concept for the 2002 Cobra, and didn't like the way that it was turning out. John Coletti realized he wanted to supercharge the Terminator Cobra, make it something that was a lot better. So he codenamed it Terminator for a performance reason. Okay, it was supposed to terminate the discussion between the Firebird and Camaro versus the Mustang. Okay, and on a competitive front, terminate the competition. So it just so happened that the last few years of the Camaro ended in 2002. It was done, and so right as the 03 Cobra was rolling out, it was terminated. So people like to joke around and say, haha, the Terminator Cobra terminated the Camaro and the Firebird, when in reality it was a whole production thing, as we mentioned earlier. So in the end, just keep that in mind. But on a performance level, the Terminator Cobra did do its job. And I did have a YouTube viewer who was kind of arguing with me about this, and I have to disagree because he was saying, oh, it doesn't count. It doesn't count because the 03 Cobra came out after the 02 Camaro, so the battle never happened. Well, that's wrong for a few reasons. Number one, this battle's been going on for the whole fourth generation, and technically even since 1967 when the Camaro came out, so you can't really say that. Okay, also, if you really want to get technical, by the time the 03 Cobras were unveiled in late 2002, those cars were both sold at the same time, despite the model year. You know that sometimes a car comes out before the model year. It's usually midway through the year before that. And as this article was saying, that there were even 30 models that came out in 2003. So if you want to play the card, you technically can say that they were out at the same time. Okay, and in a war scenario, if we're talking about a battle here, let's just look at World War II as an example. It's like so much happened during World War II, and just because it was at the very end that the atomic bomb was made, that doesn't mean that you go back and say, well, okay, it doesn't count because now you have that weapon and we surrendered. So even if you surrender in a war, that's still losing the battle. Okay, and so there's also different roles that each of these cars are playing. So you could say the V6 Mustang is the boots on the ground, and the 0304 Cobra is the heavy artillery. So when the 03 Cobra first came out, Muscle Mustangs and Fast Fords did get a brand new 02 SS Camaro and put it up against the 03 Cobra, and so they took it and ran it around the track and also at the quarter mile. And so around the track, they were actually surprised. The Mustang, with its heavier front end, everything like that, was a slight disadvantage, but they actually praised it, saying that it did really well despite the extra weight, given it did have the independent rear suspension, some other things that helped. So in the end, the Cobra did 126.25 around the track, and they compared that to 126.57, so not too much of a difference. But the good news was the Terminator was still faster around the track despite the extra added weight in the nose and some other things. So SVT did a great job with the independent rear suspension and everything to balance the car out. And so otherwise, under the hood, the Terminator was shining with that supercharger on the top. That was making all the difference, and the built bottom end to support it. The Camaro, it did its best for having kind of an outdated LS1 at that time. It was still more horsepower than the traditional LS1 in the very end. And so then they moved on to the track, the quarter-mile strip, and they had a pretty big headwind that day, and so both cars kind of suffered against it, but they ran them both, and to no surprise, the Terminator outdid the Camaro. So on that day with the bad headwind, the best numbers were 1283 at 107 for the Terminator Cobra, and the Camaro was slower than that at 1325 at 106. Bottom line, the Cobra was faster. 0.46 seconds is considerable, and they couldn't get the Camaro into the 12s. Earlier, they did get the Terminator on a different day at 1267 at 110, and you can say that the Camaro also could have probably gone faster without the headwind too, but end of the day, the Terminator was just the better car. It was both of them were 4th gen and at the end of their production, so you can't really say like the Terminator was a 5th gen car versus a 4th gen car. So interior, I think Mustang had it better. And, a lot of things comfort-wise, I think that's why so many people went to the Mustang over the Camaro and Firebird. But each car did have their good attributes to it, and, looks and comfort and everything is kind of speculative. Now, as close as these cars were to competing with each other, this was a whole new ballgame. The main difference here is this isn't two NA cars going back and forth again and seeing what little bolt-ons are going to do. John Coletti had said that the Terminator was basically breathing through a straw, and that was true. And as they saw, the magazine then took the Terminator over, and they just took off the airbox and made 390 at the wheels. And I can even attest to this on my own Terminator, where here's its dyno where all it had was an intake and a catback, otherwise stock, and it was making 414 to the wheels horsepower and 390 torque. So definitely, just very easy to open them up and make even more horsepower. Okay, and with the positive displacement supercharger, look at that torque curve. It's completely flat. From off idle, you're pretty much at full torque, so a completely different case here, car for car. After that, you're going to see that simple pulley swaps are completely changing how everything is going here. Some of my favorite videos, including this one on YouTube, shows a Z06 go up against a Terminator convertible, and so the Z06 was stock, the Terminator only had a pulley, and even at that, it was just walking away from the Corvette. So now the Terminator Cobra was on the same level as Corvettes, and so clearly it would have been hard for GM to compete with this. In fact, I also have a friend at work, and he tells me a story about back in 2003 era. His friend had a Firebird LS1, and he was reading about the Terminator, got frustrated, and threw the magazine down, super mad, and then turned to his friend and said, a pulley is all they need, and they can destroy us. Okay, so it was clear that the Terminator was this huge advancement. It was everything that they were hoping that it would be. Okay, and also going back to the argument that, it doesn't count that the Terminator came out after the Camaro. Well, if anything, it counts even more because now the Camaro Firebird didn't have any ammunition left. So every car that was already produced and out on the street rolling around was the older Camaro Firebird. And so now you actually did have the 03 Cobra coming out with a supercharged platform and just killing people all on the street. So not to say that you can't mod both cars and have different outcomes, but the point is you don't get into an LS1 Camaro and Firebird and go to turn the key and now all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore. So the point is what do you really have that's running around on the street? You're going to have a bunch of modded Camaros and Firebirds with the heads and cam, perhaps, and some nitrous. But now, on the other hand, you have Terminators running around with Whipples and 600 to 800 horsepower. So it's just a whole new ball game. And until GM got back into the game years later, the Mustang had full reign on the streets and was now being compared to Corvettes because that's all that there really was. And so, of course, we need to bring up the 2004 GTO, which was the previous Holden Monero, And so basically, this is kind of another argument people make is, well, the Terminator really didn't kill off the Camaro and the Firebird because you still had the GTO. Okay, well, let's look at both sides of that. One, the GTO wasn't out until 2004, so technically there was a gap for 2003. But on top of that, as we discussed earlier, the Terminator did not terminate the production of the Camaro and the Firebird. Only on a performance level was it really terminating it. It was, the Mustang program itself that kind of outsold the Firebird Camaro. So same thing in this way. You could argue both cases and say that GM still had, a pony car in the running. And, from 04 to 06. And as it first came out, it was a 5.7 liter, very comparable, 350 horsepower, very comparable to what the Camaro and Firebird was. They even upped that to the 6.0 and got 400 horsepower out of it. And so you're getting closer, but you still are not outdoing the Terminator for that. Then keep in mind the body style of the 4th generation Mustang ended. Okay, so it's not like the Terminator terminated itself or anything like that, too, or some other GTO terminated the Terminator. It didn't happen. So that's just a body style ending, and as proof in the 05 body style, the 5th gen Mustang. In 2007, you had the GT500 continue. So Mustang itself never ended like the Camaro and Firebird had. So in conclusion, yes, it was the V6 Mustang that was mainly responsible for the demise of the Camaro and the Firebird for the 4th generation. After that, GM just couldn't compete. On a performance level, however, the Terminator did do its job. It terminated the discussion between the performance, whether you're talking Camaro, Firebird, or even GTO. It's now prying into the Corvette territory. So Terminator did what it was designed to do. It was designed to do all that during the middle of the battle, so it's not like it was, an afterthought. They had their sights set on the Camaro and Firebird and did outperform them. So anyway, that's what I think. Go ahead and put your comments in if you disagree, or if you think otherwise. Go ahead and just put in the comments for a friendly discussion on what other points you think should be brought up if there's something that I missed. But anyway, that's my take on it. So as always, thanks for watching.